Grazie ragazzi, willkommen and bienvenue to Cannabis Sciences Live on LinkedIn. Today we are going to discuss about an important and often debated topic that is cannabis and addiction. There are a lot of people that talk about this, but let's go to see what science say about this aspect of cannabis. The discussion about cannabis addiction will be divided in two parts. Today, we are going to explore what addiction is, if cannabis is an addictive substance, and the involvement of the endocannabinoid system in the reward processes. In the next slide on this topic, we are going to explore the potential of cannabis to be used to counter addiction, for example, nicotine addiction, alcohol addiction, heroin addiction, and so on. But without further ado, let's go. Let's start this live and let's go to see in brief what we intend for addiction. First of all, I like to remember that the English term addiction is derived from the Latin word ad and dicere, and it is a verb form which literally means to speak to. Moreover, addiction, that is the abstract noun derived from the verb, was the technical Latin term for the judicial act by which a debtor was made slave of his creditor. So addiction was the name to indicate the slave of a creditor. And for this reason, this term was used by Romans starting from the 2nd, 3rd century before Christ to describe people who were slaves to gambling. So, and this is a very interesting aspect indeed. Already at the time, and we are talking more than 2,000 years ago, the relationship between gambling, financial problems, and enslavement was well established. At the time, gambling was a problem in the society, and the term used to define people slaved from gambling was addiction. Now, today, in medical context, the term addiction refers to a specific condition where an individual experiences an overwhelming need to consume a particular substance or for example, a drug or a narcotic, or to engage in certain behaviors such as gambling, addiction. Therefore, addiction is a condition in which the habit of consuming a particular substances or to engage in a behavior becomes a necessity. So the habit becomes a necessity that transforms later into a pathological situation, causing people to lose the control over it. Um, Addiction is a concept related to dependence, but there are differences. Indeed, addiction medically refers to a chronic relapsing disorder characterized by compulsivity toward drug seeking and also towards problematic behaviors, characterized by a continued use despite bad consequences, harmful consequences, and long-lasting changes in the brain. So addiction, this is very important, induce changes in the brain architecture. Addiction is moreover accompanied by the inability to control drug use. There is always a strong craving for the substance, and it's related also to withdrawal symptoms. This is addiction. Dependence, on the other hand, refers dependence occurs when the body has adapted to the presence of a substance and leading to withdrawal symptoms when the substance is the intake of the substance is stopped. So dependence can occur with or without addiction and can be it's primarily a physiological problem, but can be also a physical problem. So addiction is a chronic disorder and nowadays is treated like a medical condition, while dependence refers to the adaptation of our body to the presence of a substance. Uh, yes, both, as I was saying, both depends on addiction can be characterized by tolerance. That means that people need a larger amount of the substance to elicit the desired effect, and withdrawal symptoms that can cause very negative symptoms and unpleasant symptoms such as anxiety, shakiness, nausea, and vomiting, sweating, and itching. Sweating and itching are sometimes the signs of withdrawal symptoms. Yes, it's important also to remember that dependence, regardless of its object, so dependence towards a substance or towards also a behavior, can present in two different forms that can be also sometimes concurrently, that are physical dependence and psychological dependence. The physical dependence is characterized by physical need to consume the substance or to engage in certain behavior uh, to allow the normal functioning of the body. Uh, our body knows that to understand, perceive that to function in a certain way, it needs that substance that it was taking or that behavior that was engaging in the past to function in a good way. Indeed, if this need is not met, if the substance is not taken, the individual experiences the so-called withdrawal syndrome, and as I was saying, it's characterized by very unpleasant symptoms. This is the physical dependence, so it's the physical need of our body, while the psychological dependence is characterized by an desire to re-experience the pleasurable effect of the substance or of the behavior on which one depends. So, physical dependence is our body that needs the substance to function well and to not experience the withdrawal symptoms, while the psychological dependence is the desire, the craving for a substance. There are the different kind of addiction today. The most frequent and most recognized kind of addiction are present in these slides and are, for example, but not all. Yeah, it's just to say there are different kind of addiction. We have, for example, alcohol addiction, nicotine addiction, drugs addiction, but also that are addiction to a substance, but there are also other type of addiction. For example, technology, addiction to technology, to food, to caffeine, gambling, to sex addiction. There are different kind of addiction, and but we have different kind of addiction, but more or less all the addiction have the similar aspect that I showed previously, but also they undertake the same phases. And it is important to understand which are the phases of addiction to understand when and where to act, also with with drugs or with behavioral action. All the addiction are characterized, of course, by an initial use that marks the first exposure to a substance. And this can occur for various reasons, for a medical need, for the pressure of, for example, friends, for experimentation. Then there can be various various reason for why people start to use a substance. Also to try. Sometimes people say, I want to try just one time, and this is the initial use. Then there is the abuse. During the phase of abuse, the individual engage in an improper use of the substances. For example, the recommended dosages are exceeded, the substance is used in hazardous situation, or people become to use the substance despite the fact that it experiences negative consequences. So this is the phase of abuse, that is followed by the phase of the risky behaviors. As the abuse progress, individual may engage in risky behavior, for example, driving under the influence of a substance, engaging in illegal activity to obtain the substance, and so on. Then we have the phase of the tolerance. As I said before, the body develops tolerance to the substance. This means that the body requires higher doses to achieve the desired effect. After tolerance, there is always the phase of dependence. In the dependence stage, individuals became physically or psychologically or both dependent on a substance to function normally. And there is, of course, during this phase, there is the compulsive need or compulsive seek for a substance. There is the craving for the substance and the inability to cope without the substance. The phase of dependence led to addiction. Let's remember that addiction is a chronic mental disorder, and it is characterized by the fact that individuals lose control over the use of the substance, despite adverse consequences, despite the fact that they know that it's not good for them to continue assuming the substance, but they cannot do anything than that to continue in this drug-seeking behavior, we can say. And addiction is a disorder that impairs all the aspects of one's life, including, for example, relationships, the works, and especially the health of people is completely disrupted by addiction. There is a last stage of addiction, that is the relapse phase. And this is very important because even after periods of abstinence, or even after successful treatment to overcome addiction, individuals might experience relapse, characterized by a return to addictive behaviors. This can be due to various factors, of course, psychological factors, stress, lack of support, and usually underlying psychological issues and so on. But it's important to note that these seven phases occur in each case. I mean that even if people are addicted to nicotine or to cocaine or to gambling, that are different substances or behaviors, these phases are more or less the same. Maybe what is different is the intensity of each aspect. Okay, now let's go to see what is the biology underlying the addiction, and this depends to the reward circuit that is in a very that is schematized in this slide. Just the main aspect. We don't want to go deep in the reward mechanism, but the brain's reward circuit is at the base of the mechanism of addiction. Indeed, when this reward circuit is affected, is affected by a substance or by a not correct use of a substance, people experience dependence and addiction. What happens? Normally, in a healthy individual, this circuit serves to reinforce important behaviors such as eating, drinking, the reproduction, social interaction. For example, when a person is hungry, the reward circuit motivate people to seek for food. In which way? Because they know that we'll feel better, we feel a pleasurable sensation after eating. Indeed, what happens when people eat? This reward system is activated, and there is a sense of pleasure that invades the body, and this makes eating, for example, enjoyable and memorable, prompting the individual to repeat this behavior when he or she is hungry. And this circuit function for all the normal daily activity, but addictive substances can alter this system and alter this system to make a shift from a natural need towards craving for a substance. This reward circuits involve various brain areas, various neurotransmitters, but the main neurotransmitter involved in this circuit is dopamine, especially the dopamine that especially the dopamine that is released from neuron that project from a peculiar area of the brain that is called ventral tegmental area to the nucleus accumbens, that is an area in the middle encephalus, and then to the frontal cortex. So the neurons that goes from the ventral tegmental area to the nucleus accumbens and then to the limbic system are responsible for the reward processes, and the neurotransmitter involved in this circuit is dopamine. What happened? When we engage in a pleasurable activity, there is an increase in the production of dopamine. Dopamine within the ventral tegmental area, that is this one VTA that I showed in this slide. So what happened? A pleasurable activity increase the production of dopamine from the VTA, ventral tegmental area, to the nucleus accumbens. Here, dopamine and to the frontal cortex. Here, dopamine interacts with its receptor, and it induces a feeling of pleasure also known as the reward effect. So dopamine interacting with the receptor induce the reward effect. Soon after this effect occurs, dopaminergic molecules are removed from the synaptic space, that is the space between neurons, and then it is transported back into the neurons in the way that the circuits can start again. What what happens with the addictive substances is that these substances increase the dopamine levels in the reward circuit, and this can be done in different ways. Indeed, some substances such as alcohol or heroin increase dopamine production in the BTA area. Others, such as, for example, methamphetamines or cocaine, inhibits the reuptake of the dopamine. So different kind of substances act differently, but the final action is the same. In this mechanism cause an overwhelming production of dopamine that continuously interact and stimulate the receptor, and this results in a prolonged and intense feeling of pleasure, of euphoria, of well-being experienced by addicted people. So, summarizing, normally dopamine in the reward circuit elicit the pleasure that is consequent to reward after after a pleasurable activity. The additive substances increase the production of the dopamine. Dopamine interacts a lot with the receptor, and there is an intense feeling of pleasure. But what happens? The problem lies in the day after. We can say, indeed, after this circuit is always and always enhanced by additive substances, this substance ultimately disrupted the circuit, because the circuit become less responsive to everyday stimuli. The seeking for food, for drink, also for sex, is not perceived as rewarding, because there is a sensitization of the receptors, and the only thing that is perceived as rewarding is the substance itself. So people engage in using the substance again and again. And this is so the way in which substances alter the reward circuits and alter also life priorities. Indeed, the only things that people that are addicted look for is the substances. And this, of course, this is just a scheme, but there is also the fact that sometimes the substance lose its potency, so the people needs more and more higher doses to achieve the rewarding effect, and this mechanism can, for example, lead to overdose. So first of all, you lose the reward, the pleasure, after everyday situation of life. The only things that cause pleasure is the substances, but the substances can develop tolerance, so you need more and more of these substances, and this can lead to overdose, finally to the death. This is the mechanism by which a substance alters this very important circuit present in our brain. That is the reward system. So now let's try to answer to the main question. Is cannabis addictive? Well, we can say what the report of the National Institute on Drug Abuse of the United States say about this aspect. Is cannabis addictive? Well, according to this report, the 30% of those who use cannabis may have some degree of cannabis use disorder because just let's go back. Nowadays, addiction to a substance is not called addiction, but it's called substance abuse disorder that can be uh, mild, moderate, or heavy. So also for cannabis, we talk about cannabis use disorder. And according to a report of the National Institute of Health of the United States, about 30% of people who use cannabis start to develop a kind of use disorders. Moreover, this report says that cannabis is sometimes associated with dependence, in which the person experiences the withdrawal symptoms that when not taking cannabis, that in this case, the withdrawal symptoms um, induce symptoms like irritability, mood disorders, sleep disturbances, decreases appetite, of course, craving towards the substances. This report also showed that this kind of dependence peak within the first 2 weeks. Well, that this dependence may last maximum 2 weeks. So after 2 weeks, the symptoms of the dependence of cannabis is ended. So cannabis can cause dependence, not addiction. Indeed, in some cases, according to the report, cannabis use disorder can become addiction when it happens when a person cannot stop using cannabis, but estimating the numbers of people addicted to cannabis is not easy. In general, studies suggest that around 8-10% of people who use cannabis will become dependent on it, and this number may rise to about 15-20% in those who start using in their teens. So almost about 30% of cannabis users can develop some degree of cannabis use disorder. In around 8-10%, this can lead to dependence, and this number increase if people start using cannabis when they are in their teens, if they use cannabis chronically, and if they use varieties with higher THC doses, because of course THC is the substances that is the main responsible for the addictive effects of cannabis. Now, before ending this live, I would like to highlight and outline a very important thing. Indeed, everything discussed so far regarding the ability of cannabis to induce dependence applies to people who use cannabis for recreational purposes. And also the studies that report some degree of dependence, that we have to say dependence exists with cannabis. I would say that the studies that consider this aspect consider only recreational users and not medical cannabis patients. Indeed, when it comes to patients, things are quite different. Indeed, nearly all studies on patients indicate that medical cannabis patients do not develop addiction. Dependence can be present in some cases because it is as we have seen before, it is the physiological adaptation of the body to the substances. But addiction is not observed. And this is for a very important reason. I think this is especially because recreational users consume cannabis for pleasure. And so the compulsive seek for this behavior can lead to cannabis use disorder. So recreational people who use cannabis for recreation look for the pleasure that derived from the use of cannabis. But patients, on the other hand, use cannabis not for searching pleasure, but to fight against a particular peculiar medical condition. And so the use of cannabis is related to this peculiar condition. So they can depend on the effect of cannabis because cannabis relieves its condition, but they are not addicted. Also because probably in the absence of their medical condition, of their pathology, they will not have used cannabis. So cannabis induce dependence, especially on in the recreational use, but with the medical use, well, cannabis induce dependence on the recreational use, and this is a factor that happens in almost 50% of people, but in every case, after 2 weeks of quitting the use of cannabis, this phenomenon can disappear. But this happens only to recreational users because patients with medical cannabis do not experience addiction for sure. They experience a little degree of dependence due to the fact that the body needs the substances to function normally, but to fight against the pathology, I can say. It's better to say. And so dependence is something that we can say it does not apply to medical cannabis. Well, we arrived to the end of this half an hour with cannabis and addiction. There are a lot of things to see. For example, there are tables about the additive potential of cannabis compared to other substances, but I will show these tables in the next slide. See you, so don't miss the next appointment with Cannabis Sciences Live on LinkedIn. I hope that this lesson, this live, have that you'll enjoy this live. And if so, put a like on our LinkedIn page. If you want comment or you have questions, just comment on the LinkedIn page and we will answer to you very soon. Thank you very much to everybody and see you next time.